Alright, so something else we also learned in Algebra 2 is domain and range. So the domain is the set of all what? Set of all. Domain is your x's. So it's all of your x values. And range is the set of all y values. And something new, we're going to have some extra things that we didn't see in Algebra 2, and I'm going to kind of give you the brief overview right now, and we'll get to some examples of those. So sometimes, like in our domain and range that we talked about in Algebra 2, we had like to infinity, but something we never had were like holes in the graph. So sometimes we'll see an open circle just randomly. That's a hole. So that means wherever that hole is, that number is not in your domain or range. And then we also have what are called asymptotes. And last year, I don't even think we got into it last year. I was hoping to. But it's basically a line. So if you look down here at number 10, see this dashed line? That's a vertical asymptote. And what that means is that my graph is never going to touch it. It's going to get as close as possible. It's going to be like so close, but it's never going to actually touch it. So that would be something that we need to look at that's not in our domain or range. Okay. So when we're doing domain or range, we're going to exclude. What does exclude mean? Keep from, leave out. It's not going to be part. If it causes, let me make sure I get this right, a 0 in the denominator. So if we're looking at an equation, for example, if I have x plus 7 over x minus 2. If this was something I wanted to look at, and we're going to get to some of these examples, if it causes a 0 in the denominator, remember you can't divide by 0. So if there's a 0 in the denominator, that has to be left out of our domain. What number would cause a 0 in the denominator? If I plugged a number in for x, what number would make that 0? 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. So a 2 I would have to leave out of my domain. Or if we have an even root, like a square root, a fourth root, a sixth root of a negative. So in Algebra 2 we talked about imaginary numbers. Square roots of negatives is imaginary. That cannot be in our domain. So those are two big things we've got to think about when we're doing our domain and range. And we will. I'll remind you of those. You'll get used to looking at those. And just for reference, because you may not have seen them yet, an asymptote is an imaginary line that the function never touches or crosses. So let's actually get into some examples. Number 7. This is an easy one because I give you the points. Domain is a list of all of your x values. I prefer that you write them from least to greatest. If you don't, it's not wrong, but I still prefer you to get in that habit. So domain we've got what? What do I start with? -3, and you can use the little curly brackets. That's kind of the formal way of doing it. -3, 1, 2, 3, and 7. That's the domain. That's a list of your x values. And then the range, actually we need to start with -4. Yeah. -4, -2. I have 2 points that have a 5. You only have to write it once. So 5, and then 6. So do any of my x values repeat?
No.
Nope, they're all different. So this means that it is a function. My directions ask me to do both. Domain and range, and then it is a function. Number 8. This is a mapping. So I have the point -6, -4. So you can look at where those arrows go. So my domain, they're already wrote down in order. So -6, -3, 2, 3. And my range, this one is not in order from least to greatest. -4, -2, -1, 0. Is this one a function? No. That 2, notice that 2 was mapped to both the 0 and the -2. So we have a 2, 0 point and a 2, -2 point. Alright. Getting a little bit harder because we're going to go to some graphs. When we did graphs, one thing we learned about last year was the intervals. So our answer, we're going to have a parenthesis, and we're going to have a starting number and an ending number, and those are going to be in parentheses. We start with the lowest and we end with the highest number. So when we're doing domain and we're talking about our x's, x's run left to right. So we're going to go left, that's my lowest, to right, my highest. Range is bottom to top. The lower numbers are at the bottom, the higher numbers are at the top. So if I'm going left to right, what is the lowest x value that I have? -4. Yeah. So here's my start right here. That x value is -4. So my domain is going to start at -4. And then I follow this line. What does that arrow mean? It continues forever. So can I find an ending point? Nope. So what do I put when it goes forever? Infinity. So my domain is from -4 to infinity. The range, this is my lowest point, right here. But range is your y's. So what's my lowest y? -2. What about the highest point? It is infinity. So it looks like this is just going to go like sideways, but it's really angled up very slightly. So it is infinity. Unless it's clearly a flat line, you can assume that it goes up. Alright, now number 10. This is a pretty complicated one. So we're going to need to make some notes on this page right here. First of all, do you see a hole anywhere? Yes. Alright. Right here is a hole. At what point? What's that coordinate? 2, 5. So what that means, the x value of 2 is not in the domain. Domain is x's. So when you have a hole, that number, that x value, it's not in your domain. And the 5 is not in the range. So when we're writing out domain and range, we have to leave those numbers out. And I'll kind of show you how we write that. We also have those imaginary lines, which we call asymptotes. So right here is 1. This line crosses through the y-axis, correct? This is the line y equals -2. When you have a horizontal line, it crosses through the y-axis. It's a point at y equals -2. What that means is that -2 is not in the domain or range? Range, because it's y. Do I have any more asymptotes? I have a vertical one. You may know how I would write that line. Like this one I wrote y equals -2. How would I write this line? What? X equals 4. It crossed through the x-axis. which means it's x equals 4. And so 4 is not in the domain. So those notes that I have, that's just kind of me thinking. That's not really part of your answer. You don't necessarily have to write that out every time, but it helps you to have it wrote out. We're going to do this example and then we're going to stop. All right. So I really have 2 parts of a graph. I have two pieces here. Notice how I have arrows on every side. I have an arrow on the left, the right, the bottom, the top. So without the holes and asymptotes, both my domain and range are going to be negative infinity to positive, because I have arrows on every single side. But we have to basically make a break at all of these numbers. So I'm going to write some stuff on the board. You don't have to write this on your paper if you don't want. So I'm basically going to start at negative infinity. Let's do domain first. So I'm starting at negative infinity, and I know I'm stopping at positive infinity. But I have some breaks in between there. And I think there's 2 places for domain and 2 for range. What 2 numbers do I need to have a break at for my domain? What 2 numbers did I say were not included in the domain? 4 and domain.
No,
2. 2 is not in the domain, and 4. So we want to go least to greatest. So 2 and then 4. Even though 2 is not in my domain, 1.999999 is. So that's going to be really hard to write. We couldn't write that out. So what we do is I say, okay, negative infinity, and then I'm going to put 2. But that parenthesis means I get really, 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 really close to 2. But I don't include 2. It means I go really, 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 like 1.999999999. It's really close. Okay. And then I'm going to have a break. Now here's the fancy symbol we use for like a break. It's just a big U. And then I'm going to go back to 2 again. So basically, this is just saying I have a break at 2. You just got to put the 2 in both spots. And then I go to 4. And then I have my break. And I pick back up at 4. And I go to infinity. So this break, that's where my break is. So when you put a break, you put the 2 on both sides of the little U shape, because otherwise I'd be writing 1.999999999 forever. So we say 2, and then we say, but it's an open parenthesis. We're going to practice. We're going to do lots of examples of these, and we'll practice them. So that's my domain. What were the 2 numbers not in my range? 5 and negative 2. So I've got a break here, and a break there. So I'm going to say negative infinity to my first break. So basically from there to there, from there to there, and there to there. And then I've got 2 to 5, break, and then 5 to infinity. We'll do tomorrow, we'll do some more of these.